everybody. It is great to see you for part 3 of our series, Sticky Notes, where we're simply talking about some great reminders, the type of reminders that you might put on a sticky note, hence the series title. As we get started today, though, I was thinking, we're now 3/4 of the way through the series, and there are so many amazing reminders that we're just not going to have the opportunity to get to. So I thought today, as we began, I would just kind of shotgun you with like 8 other great reminders that maybe you want to put on a sticky note in your own home. And these are kind of not in any particular order, but here we go. 8 more reminders. Number 1, don't sweat the small stuff, and it's almost all small stuff. Such a good reminder, isn't it? Yeah, just don't sweat the small stuff. Number 2, second reminder, a bird in hand is worth 2 in the bush. Sometimes being greedy and going after more, is the wrong decision, so that's a good reminder. Number 3, we've got measure twice, cut once. My dad taught me this as a kid in his wood shop. And now, as an adult, I can't cut anything without measuring like 14 times. So I'm not sure if that was a good reminder for me or just added to my, being neurotic. Anyway, number 4, if at first you don't succeed, try again, unless it's skydiving. If you don't succeed the first time, just move on with your life. That's a good reminder. Number 5, the best things in life are not things. Oh, that's so good. So it's just like hits you right there, doesn't it? Number 6, people will forget what you said and did, but they will remember how you made them feel. So true. Number 7, you can't make everyone happy. You're not pizza, right? Anybody else? My favorite food by far is pizza. Anybody else? Am I the only one? No, yeah, a bunch of us. All right, yeah, we'll have a pizza party sometime. And number 8, because winter is around the corner, and I haven't said this in a long time, don't eat yellow snow. You don't want to do that. That'd be a bad choice. So kids in the room, don't eat yellow snow. All right, now, none of those have anything to do with our faith. The series, obviously, where we're camping out is on reminders that have to do with our faith and with life and things that make sense to remember, to try to remember in light of the fact that there is a God who invites us to know him. And so over the course of the series, the first week, we talked about this idea that small acts, how did we say it? Small acts of faithfulness lead to large victories. We looked at the story of David and Goliath, and we sent you home with Post-it notes that said cheese before victories because, well, you had to be here that week to understand it. And everybody who took that Post-it note in like a year will see that and go, what was that sermon about? I don't remember. Then last week, we talked about the fact that God is always at work, even when we can't see how. And we talked about this prayer that Elisha prayed over his servant, open my eyes and let me see. And so we said last week, God is always at work, even when you can't see how. Such a good thing to remember. And today, I want to add to the list of the ones we're talking about in our series, this reminder. The series reminder for today is, there is more to life than this life. There is more to life than this life. I wonder if you've heard the one about the pastor and the taxi driver. Oh, I'll tell you just in case. So anyway, a pastor and a taxi driver died on the same day, and they went to heaven. When they get to the pearly gates, St. Peter meets them there, and St. Peter says, welcome, I'm so glad you're here. Come on in, let me show you around. I'll show you to your homes where you'll be living for the rest of eternity. And so they start to walk down the streets of gold, and they approach this one mansion, just big, beautiful mansion, and St. Peter turns to the taxi driver, and he says, here, this is your home, taxi driver. This is where you're going to live for all of eternity, which made the pastor really excited. He was like, if this is where the taxi driver is going to live, where am I going to live, And they keep going, and then St. Peter leads the pastor to this much smaller, much more modest home. And he says, here you go, pastor. This is where you're going to be living for all of eternity. And the pastor is confused, and so he said, St. Peter, just out of curiosity, the taxi driver had such a huge mansion, and my house is so much smaller. Can I ask why that is? And St. Peter said, well, sure. Whenever you preached, people fell asleep, but when he drove, people prayed to me. So I guess the moral of the story is if you could all just stay awake for the next 35 minutes, I would really appreciate it. But the point is that there is more to life than this life. Now, this is an interesting subject to poll Americans on. Americans are interesting. When it comes to the afterlife, there is widespread belief that there is more to life than this life. Americans, by and large, largely do believe that there is something beyond this lifetime. There is some sort of an afterlife, and that's generally held by most Americans. Most Americans would use the term or the title heaven to describe what that place is or to refer to that place. Most Americans, the vast majority, would say that the afterlife will be a positive thing, that it's going to be a good thing, a good place where you want to go. And this is interesting, maybe because we're talking about Americans, but the vast majority of Americans would say, and I will be there. The vast majority of Americans would say, I'll be there as well. And so maybe that's really good. You know, we're a very optimistic country. So most Americans believe there is an afterlife. They would call it heaven. It'll be good, and they'll be there. Beyond that, there are a lot of questions. There's a lot of, well, I don't know exactly about this or that or how that works or who gets in. But for the most part, those questions don't bother us. Because for the most part, we don't spend a lot of time thinking about the afterlife and what comes next after this. Most of the time, our days are filled and our minds are consumed by our meetings and appointments and our to-do lists and our commitments and our needs and conversations and stressors and things that we're anxious about and social media and television shows. And so we really don't spend that much time thinking about eternity, but there is deep in our hearts like this curiosity. We're just mostly not in a hurry to get there. Many of you know that I like to listen to country music. I'm a country music fan, and I like a lot of the old country music too that I grew up with. And I think it was Joe Diffie back in the 90s who sang, "Prop me up beside the jukebox if I die. Lord, I want to go to heaven, but I don't want to go tonight." And I think that reflects how a lot of us feel about the subject. We're like, yeah, I guess I'd like to go there some point, but I'm not in any hurry to get there, and we don't know much beyond that. Now, what's interesting is that this innate interest in eternity and what the afterlife will look like is not new to us or our generation or our country. In fact, we know that this has been something that was observable in people for as far back as we have recorded history. And even if you go back to kind of the Old Testament times, the author of the book of Ecclesiastes, we think wrote this book about 2,500 years ago on the other side of the world, in a world very different than our own, a very different culture than our own. But even 2,500 years ago, the author of Ecclesiastes observed this in people. He wrote, God has planted eternity in the human heart. He's planted eternity in the human heart, but even so, people cannot see the whole scope of God's work from beginning to end. Even though God has placed eternity in our heart, we all wonder about things. Nobody really has clarity on what God has been doing from beginning to the end of eternity. We just don't know, but there is this curiosity. And for the most part, that's okay, because we just kind of take life one day at a time. We take life as it comes, and we just roll through. But here's the question I want to throw out this morning as we get started. Sort of a big, philosophical, existential question for 10:30, 10 o'clock in the morning. But here's the question I want to ask as we get started today. What if by just simply moving through life, what if we risk missing something really important? What if by just taking life one day at a time and not really stopping to think that much about eternity, what if we risk something really important about the afterlife? What if we miss something that if we understood it and we thought about it today, it would actually change the way that we live here and now in this life? Today, what I want to do is I want to give us some space. I simply want to give all of us some margin in our life to think about this type of a question, to think about the answer to this question. In fact, really what I want to do this morning is just simply tee up a variety of questions, and I want to let these questions guide our thoughts, your thoughts on this subject, so that you don't miss anything that could be important in light of eternity. Now, as we get started, if you're not a follower of Jesus yet, like maybe you're just starting your faith journey, maybe you're just checking out church, maybe somebody invited you and you didn't want to be rude, so you said, well, okay, yeah, I can do anything once, Maybe they offered to buy you lunch afterwards, and you're like, yeah, okay, for a free meal, I'll go to church for an hour. So you find yourself here. Well, I just want to say to you, first of all, I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad that you chose to join us this weekend to consider what it is that we talk about and believe and how it impacts our life in a tangible way. I would say to you, you should know that as I answer these questions, my personal bias comes from my belief that Jesus is who he claimed to be, and that is Emmanuel, God with us. Right? We all have a personal bias. We all have a lens through which we see the world and we answer questions. And so I just want to be upfront with you that my personal bias is that Jesus is who he claimed to be. And my personal bias is based on the eyewitness documents that record the life and teaching and ministry and really most importantly, the resurrection of Jesus. I believe because of the resurrection being true, I believe that because it's true, that, I just trust everything else Jesus said. I mean, if somebody could predict their own death and resurrection and then pull it off, I feel like that person's probably the most credible voice on the topics of life, death, and eternity. And so I'm just going to kind of roll with them. That's where I'm coming from. But if you're not there yet, that's okay. You get to sit today and just listen and consider what Jesus had to say about the subject. And I would argue you could even just apply the wisdom to your life because I think following Jesus makes you better at life and makes your life better. But the question is, what did Jesus have to say about eternity and this idea that there is more to life than this life? Well, the first thing you have to understand is that Jesus very clearly believed that there was more to life than this life. In fact, as you read through those 4 accounts of Jesus' teaching, it's almost impossible to make sense of anything Jesus said if you try to detach it from Jesus' belief that there is more to life than this life. And so what we see over the course of his ministry was that Jesus taught a lot about eternity. He gave us a lot of clarity around it, starting with the fact that Jesus taught that God is real, that there is a God out there somewhere. He taught that we were created to live in community with him and that we were created to live in community with him for all of eternity. That's at the core of the most famous verse in the Bible. That's at the core of the most famous thing Jesus ever said. You've probably seen it at stadiums on signs that say John 3:16. Well, this is what John 3:16, it says. Jesus said this. He said, God loved the world so much that he gave his one and only son, talking about himself, so that whoever believes in him may not be lost, may not perish or die, but so that we might have eternal life. So Jesus very clearly taught that there is a God, that he loves us, he loves you, and that he desires to spend all of eternity with you, living and active and well in relationship with him. Jesus also taught that between the time that we live this life and the next life, he taught that we should pray for and work towards bringing heaven to our world, that we should try to bring the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven to our world. This is at the center of Jesus' most famous prayer, or what we call the Lord's Prayer. A group of people come to Jesus one day and they say, Jesus, would you teach us how to pray? You pray like so well. And Jesus said, of course I'll teach you how to pray. He said, this is what you should pray for. He said, our Father in heaven. So God is our Father and he's in heaven. May your name always be kept holy. May your kingdom come, the kingdom of heaven come, and what you want be done here on earth as it is in heaven. So Jesus encouraged us to pray for and work towards bringing the kingdom of heaven to the kingdom of earth. Jesus taught that because there is more to life than this life, we don't need to be afraid of anything that comes at us in this lifetime. In fact, the most commonly stated command that Jesus ever gave was simply 2 words, fear what? Not. Fear not. In fact, Jesus said, not only do you not need to be afraid of anything you're going to experience in this life, Jesus taught you don't even need to worry about the things in this that you deal with in this life. Like all of the stuff that we run after, all of the stuff that you try to wrap your mind around and pursue. He's like, you don't even need to worry about that. He said, instead, here it is in Matthew 6 in the Sermon on the Mount, instead seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these other things will be given to you as well. So Jesus taught that heaven is a real place, that God is there, that we are invited to live there for all of eternity with him. in the meantime, we are invited to live in the kingdom of heaven here on earth with him, helping more people live in that. And Jesus taught that he is preparing our place there for all of eternity. In John 14, before Jesus went to the cross, he gathered his disciples, and this is what he said to them. He said, "Do not let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. My Father's house has many rooms. If it were not so, would I have told you that I am going there to prepare a place for you? And if I go and if I prepare a place for you, I will come back and I will take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am." So Jesus taught that even as we look at death, we do not need to be afraid because he is preparing our place for us with him for all of eternity. One of the truly life-changing things that Jesus taught about eternity was that what we do in this lifetime has implications for the next lifetime. Again, in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says in Matthew 6, "Do not store up treasure for yourselves on earth, where moth and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasure in heaven, where moth and vermin do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal." So Jesus taught what we do in this lifetime, our actions here and now, have implications that will last and reverberate for all of eternity. This is why we can say it is important to remember there is more to life than this life. Now, if that's all true, if everything that Jesus said on the subject is true, and again, I'm personally inclined to believe that it is true because I believe the eyewitness accounts, the primary source material. I also believe from my own 42 years of experience of what I would call living in the kingdom of heaven here and now with Jesus. Because of my personal experience, I'm inclined to believe that it was. But if everything that Jesus said is true, then this idea that there is more to life than this life, this should become the lens through which we see everything else in our world today. This should become the filter through which we filter everything we say and everything we do and everything that is said and everything that happens to us. This idea that there is more to life than this life should become the filter. But the problem with that is that there is this awful thing standing between us and eternity, and that thing is death. And nobody wants to think about death. I certainly don't want to think about death. Nobody wants to live their life just with death at the forefront of their mind. Of course we don't. But this has massive implications for our lives. And the reason it has such important implications for our lives is because of this truth. We live towards what we are most focused on in life. We live towards what we are most focused on in life. Meaning, our life moves in the direction of whatever it is that we are most focused on. And when I say our life moves in the direction of, what I mean is our life, our time, our energy, our efforts, our finances, our words and deeds tend to move in the direction of whatever it is that we're most focused on in life. This has been true for your own life. Go back to high school for a second. I know some of you are like, please don't make me go back to high school for a second, right? That's okay. You're not really going back. Just think back to high school, right? When I think of high school, I realized that I was focused on probably 4 things above everything else. Those 4 things for me personally would have been athletics, my friendships, dating, and then answering the question, what's next? Like that's where my focus was as a high school, teenage guy. My thoughts were focused on sports, friends, girls, and what's going to happen after high school, right? And so when I think back to my high school years, that's the direction my life moved in. My life moved towards those things. I gave my time, my energy, my efforts, my finances towards those 4 things because that's what I was focused on. For you, it might have been something different. Maybe as you think back to high school, like the main thing you were focused on was your academics. and your scholarship. And so maybe you were a reader or studier. You cared about your grades. And so your time, your life moved in the direction of what you were focused on. Maybe for others of you, it was something else. Maybe you were in the band or in choir and you love music and you love creating music. And so as your focus went, so did your life. Maybe you were in a club, maybe it was an international club, or maybe you were on the debate team, or maybe you loved theater and you are so excited about Wicked coming up in a couple weeks, right? It's going to be so good. But maybe you loved theater. Isn't it true that as your focus went, your life moved in that direction? And then after high school, what did you focus on next? Maybe after high school, you realize, as I move out of my childhood home, I'm going to have to figure out how to pay for life, right? I'm going to need some money. So maybe it was career for you. Maybe you entered the job force, the job market. Maybe you joined the military. You went to a trade school or college. Maybe along the way, at some point, you met somebody and you fell in love. And because they became your focus, your life moved in that direction. And you said, what are you doing for the rest of your life? And that sounds pretty good. Could I do that with you? And they said yes, right? I do a lot of premarital counseling with couples during the week. And one of the things that I'm always trying to do with premarital couples or couples who are in the engaged season of life is, because their focus is so laser narrowed into this singular event, this singular day, their wedding day, I'm always trying to get them to look beyond their wedding day to their actual marriage and life together. Because our life moves in the direction of what we're focused on. Maybe at some point along the way, you or somebody around you said those two little words, I'm expecting. And you know how much your life will move in the direction of parenting when you hear those words. What consumes your mind, your life moves in the direction of those things. What has it been for you? As you look back over the course of your life, no doubt your life has moved in the direction of whatever it was that you were focused on. And that's not always a bad thing, but the challenge comes, or the danger lies, in the fact that if we're not careful, we can focus on the wrong things. We can focus on things that are not ultimately worthy in light of eternity. That was the experience of Kyle Martin. Maybe a couple years ago, you saw his graduation speech to his high school graduating class. Kyle Martin went viral, or his speech went viral because he graduated as his class's valedictorian. And in his graduation speech, he tells the story about how he learned he was in the running for this award at the end of his junior year. And so at the end of his junior year, Kyle decided he wanted to achieve the ranking of graduating first in his class. He wanted to win the award of finishing as the class valedictorian. And so Kyle says that he basically was so laser focused on that, everything else fell off to the side. He skipped going out with friends. He skipped hanging out with people. He skipped dances and plays and dramas and concerts. He skipped going to athletic games. He skipped all of these things so that he could study and focus and work towards this goal of graduating number one in his class. And he achieved the goal. And so he tells the story about how they had this senior class assembly where the principal announced a bunch of awards for people. And when it came time to the valedictorian, Kyle didn't know if he had yet won the award, but when they read his name, he was filled with this euphoric high as everybody applauded him and the effort he had given. And he says, in his own words, he says, I was so excited for about 15 seconds, but then the 16th second came. And he said, in the 16th second, everybody stopped applauding. And I looked at my future, and I looked back at the last year, and I realized the price I paid to win this award wasn't worth it. The price was too high. I paid too great of a cost. Because as he looked at his senior class, and he knew they were graduating, he realized how much he had given up in terms of relationships and friendships. He realized all of the events that he had skipped and the memories that he didn't make and the time that he would never be able to get back. And he said in his graduating speech, he said, I realized that I had spent the last year of my life pursuing something that, here's his words, in light of eternity was meaningless. And this is the risk that we all run, of focusing on something or some things that in light of eternity are actually pretty meaningless. That's the danger that we all face. That's the danger that every single one of us face every single day. So what's the solution? Next question I would ask is, so what do we do about that? What's the solution? How do we live our life in a way that we do not focus on the wrong things and move our life in a direction that it does not matter in light of eternity? Well, thankfully, God gives us the answer through the Apostle Paul. And the Apostle Paul, maybe better than anybody else, could answer this question for us because the Apostle Paul knew what it was like to live life in this world. He knew what it was like to focus on things and to pursue things with everything you have. You might remember the Apostle Paul's story. He was born to a prominent Jewish family. He received as great of an education as any Jewish male could have hoped for. He achieved a position within the ranks of the Pharisees. He was quickly climbing the ranks among the Pharisees. In fact, when the church kind of started to explode, followers of Jesus started to spread out and tell people about the resurrection. Tons of people started to make the decision to follow Jesus. And so he was committed to stamping that out. And so he went around gathering up Christians and throwing them in prison. He oversaw the stoning of the first Christian martyr, a man named Stephen. And he did it all because he was laser focused on what he thought mattered most. But then he had an encounter. He had an encounter with Jesus post-resurrection. He knew Jesus had been crucified. He knew Jesus had been buried. He had heard the rumors he was alive, but he didn't buy it. Why? People who are dead stay dead. But now Jesus confronts Paul on his way to a town called Damascus, and Jesus confronts the Apostle Paul. Paul's eyes are open, and he realizes that Jesus is the real deal, and he had been giving his life to the wrong thing all along. And so Paul does a 180, and he turns the direction of his life. And so the Apostle Paul, even just talking about this turn and this realization, look at what he says in Philippians about this change in his life. He says, if somebody thinks that they have reasons to put confidence in the flesh, I have more. I was circumcised on the 8th day of the people of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews. In regards to the law, I was a Pharisee. As for zeal, I was persecuting the church. As for righteousness based on the law, I was faultless. But whatever were gains to me, I now consider loss for the sake of Christ. What's more, I consider everything a loss because of the surpassing worth of knowing Jesus Christ my Lord, for whose sake I have lost all of those things. I consider them garbage that I may gain Christ. Paul, of anybody, knew the highs of great achievement. And he knew the lows of being arrested and beaten for his faith in Jesus. And so Paul gets to the end of his life, and he sits down to pen this letter to a group of Christians living in a town called Colossae, and he wants them to get this right. He wants us to get this right. And so this is what Paul would say to them and what he would say to us. He says, since you have been raised with Christ, talking about the resurrection of Jesus. He's saying you have been raised from death to life as well. Once you decide to follow Jesus, the old is gone, the new has come. You are a new creation in Christ. Since you have been raised with Christ, here it is, set your hearts on things above where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. He said, set your hearts on things above. Set your desires, your affection, set your longings on things above, not on things of the earth. And then he doesn't stop there. He says, set your hearts on things above where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. And then he finishes by saying, set your minds on things above, not on earthly things. Set your minds on things above. He said, fix your thoughts on things of eternity. Fix your mind on thoughts of heaven. Fix your mind on thoughts that there is more to life than this life. Let your heart and your mind both be fixed on the reality that there is more to life than this life. And if you do that, your life will move in the direction of eternity. And you will get to the end of your life and you will be glad you did. I'll illustrate it like this. Imagine that this rope represents your life, your existence, right? And imagine that this rope just goes on for all of eternity. Like it goes back there and it just goes all the way, it actually just goes backstage. But imagine that this rope goes on for all of eternity, right? This rope represents your existence. It represents your life. This is your life. It will go on for all of eternity. Now this end of the rope, this red part, is the part that represents this lifetime. Like our life here on earth, right? What's crazy to me, when I stop and think about this, what's crazy to me is I realize just how easy it would be to live my entire life thinking that this is all there is to life. It would be so incredibly easy to live my life thinking all about this and being consumed with this and making this as good as I can, when the reality is there's so much more waiting for us after this life. And where it gets really crazy, where it gets kind of like scary to realize we can do this is when you think, okay, well, this is my childhood, and then this is my working adult years, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all of my life from here all the way up to about right here, and I'm going to work so hard, and I'm going to try to make as much money as I can, and I'm going to work, and I'm going to save, and I'm going to save, and I'm going to work, and I'm going to save, so that when I get to right here, I can really enjoy my existence. And I'm going to live in such a way that when I get to this part of my life, this part will be really, really good. And once I get there, whoo, baby, then I'm going to travel, and I'm going to eat so good, and I'm just going to enjoy my life once I get right there. But it's like, what about all of this? There is more to life than this life. And this is why we shouldn't be surprised when people who don't know about all of this look at the way we as followers of Jesus are living here, and they go, you're crazy. Why would you live like this? Because if all they know is this, that makes sense. But they'll go, why would you love your enemies? Why would you bother? They don't love you. Why would you love your enemies? Why would you worry about feeding the hungry? Like, don't you have enough to worry about? Like, let somebody else worry about them. Let the government worry about them. Why would you worry about feeding the hungry? Why would you slot the item of the month into your shopping list to buy coats for people who are cold and scarves and hats and gloves for children who are cold? Like, why would you do that? Why? You give away how much money? Why would you do that? That's crazy. And you know what? If all there was to life was this, they'd be right. But if it's true that there's more to life than this life, then living with all of that in mind is the most sane thing we can do. So I would say, because there is more to life than this life, let's live like it. Let's be people who live with eternity in mind. Let's live our life prioritizing relationships. Jesus said the most important thing you can do in this lifetime is to love God and people with everything you have. So let's prioritize people and loving them even when it costs us something. Let's understand that spiritual growth is not something we do to check off our list. It's something that we do because we are invited to live all of eternity in the presence of our Creator, but we are invited to do it now. We are invited to live in His presence today, knowing that His presence with us will make all the difference with all the other stuff that we pursue and get involved with and have to overcome. I would say, let's be people who fix our hearts and our minds on things above. So that when we get to the end of the life, we're able to look back and feel like, you know what? I pursued the right things. My life drifted in the direction of the right things. Let's fix our hearts and our minds on things above, and let's leave behind a legacy of faith. When we say goodbye to this tired body and this world as we know it, and we leave behind some people who are impacted by us, let's leave in them a legacy of following Jesus in countercultural ways, because we know there is more to life than this life. I want to finish this morning. I want to send you out by reading you my favorite passage from what very well may be my favorite book. The book's called Mere Christianity. The author is C.S. Lewis, and I love his thinking on this subject. And so I just want to close. We're not going to put it up on the side screens. I just simply want to finish our time together with these words. He writes, "Creatures are not born with a desire unless satisfaction for those desires exist. A baby feels hungry. Well, there is such a thing as food. A duckling wants to swim. Well, there is such a thing as water. Men feel sexual desire. Well, there is such a thing as sex. If I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. If none of my earthly pleasures satisfy it, it does not prove that the universe is a fraud. It probably means that earthly pleasures were never meant to satisfy it, but only to arouse it, to point us towards the real thing. And if that's so, then I must be careful, on one hand, to never despise or be unthankful for these earthly blessings, but on the other hand, to never mistake them for something else of which they are only a kind of copy or echo or mirage. I must keep alive in myself the desire for my true country, which I shall not find till after my death, and I must make it the main object of my life to press on to that other country and to help others do the same." There is more to life than this life. So let's not waste it. Let's leverage it as much as we possibly can for all of eternity. Can I pray for you? Heavenly Father, this is a weighty subject, Lord. As we think about life and death and eternity. But Lord, you give us so much information. You give us so much clarity. Jesus, you gave us so much insight. Would you help us to not be afraid to look at it, to consider the focus of our life and where our life is moving towards? And Lord, would you give us the courage and the strength to make an adjustment if we need to turn the direction of our life, to change what our hearts and our minds are fixed on. And Lord, in doing so, would you help us to awaken more of our diverse community to you? It's in Jesus' name that we pray. And everyone who agreed said, amen.